All right, let us say hello to the former Invicta interim featherweight champion, six-fight UFC vet, one-time UFC title challenger. She's now very, very, very busy these days with her YouTube channel, who worked for ESPN with the UFC Fight Camp, even shocking some folks at movie premieres with her bag work. The list goes on and on for Megan Anderson, who joins us ahead of a big UFC 301 this Saturday. Megan, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's been a minute since we've last had a conversation, and I was trying to look back. I actually had to Google it this morning. It was before you fought Norma Dumont in February of 2020, which obviously that win has aged
I know.
pretty damn well considering how well she's done.
I have so many people keep just sending me messages or commenting on my stuff, oddly enough, because at the time, everyone's just like, oh, it didn't mean anything because it was her first fight in the UFC, right? But now that she's had a lot of really great wins since then, everyone's like, yeah, that's aged well. I was like, so she wasn't bad when I fought her, like you said she was, and now she's good? What? No, I have a lot of respect for Norma, and she's looked phenomenal. I'm really excited to see her at Bantamweight. I seen she finally was able to make the weight. I know that was kind of an issue for her over the years, but she seems to have that figured out. She's got it down pat. I'm excited to see her journey at Bantamweight.
Yeah, and lots changed for her. Lots changed for you since that conversation, hasn't it? Like, how different has life been for the Megan Anderson of today compared to the Megan Anderson in February of 2020, knocking on the door of a world that was about to change due to COVID?
Yeah, you know what's crazy is that was the Norfolk card, and it was the last card that they had fans at before everything shut down. Because I know it kind of shut down, but they still had I'm pretty sure it was a card in Brazil, but they didn't allow fans because it was already booked. All the fighters were already there, but they didn't allow fans. So mine was the last one before everything went to shit, essentially. But no, things have significantly changed in the last 4 years, that's for sure. I like to say, and I'd like to think for the better. So yeah, change of careers, fought out my contract, didn't sign a new one. Decided to kind of pivot a little bit. My desire to compete wasn't there. My desire to train, fight, cut weight, get hit just wasn't there. I had to get my nose fixed because it had been broken so many times. And the pain from that, not gonna lie, low-key traumatized me. And I don't want to get it broken again. So there's that. But no, I very much enjoy what I'm doing now instead of fighting.
That's great. And that's what it's all about. Well, we do have UFC 301 coming up, and
Yep.
I'm one of the guys in the space. I would say I'm pretty positive, critical, certainly where I need to be, but positive overall. Yeah. And I'll preface this by saying UFC 301 was in an unfair position to begin with, having to follow 298, then 299, and then the just pure ridiculousness that UFC 300 was. Like, nothing could measure up, no matter what this card looks like. It's never going to be as good as 300. Not to mention what next month is going to look like with 302, and then Connor's coming back at 303. This card, compared to most pay-per-views, not used to what we're seeing, honestly. However, I do think for those who do buy it, it's going to be a fun watch. We get a lot of Brazilians fighting at home. It's going to be a hot crowd, interesting title fight, main event, which we'll get into. We get the return of Jose Aldo. Your thoughts on the card itself and the sort of unfortunate position it's in with the timing of it?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you in the fact that based on the last 3 pay-per-views and how stacked top to bottom they've been, it is in a very unfortunate position. But I mean, when you look, particularly the main card, right? Because that's the part that people are paying for. When you look at those fights specifically, there's a lot of really good matchups. And there's some veteran versus newcomer, new generation type fights. We have a fresh name in Steve Erceg fighting for the title, which I feel like the flyweight division has kind of been in a position over the last couple of years that only 2 or 3 people have been fighting for the belt. It's, it's been Figueiredo, Moreno, Royval, and now that Pantoja's here, he's beaten them all. So who is there? I love that we have a fresh new name. Was it the right fight to make? That's another question, considering the rankings. But I think as a whole, I'm really intrigued with particularly this main card. And I mean, look, one of the fights that I'm really excited about is Anthony Smith versus Vitor Petrino. I think that is such a great fight that I think a lot of fans are kind of sleeping on.
Yeah, it's Anthony's trying to prove to everybody who is doubting him that he hasn't lost it, that he could still go.
Yes.
And Vitor Petrino called him out, and Anthony Smith kind of wants to make an example of him and everybody else that just feels, hey, you know what? If I win a fight at 205, I'm just going to call it Anthony Smith because it's the way to go, right? And he wants to shut those people up.
Well, and I would say that Anthony traditionally does well in these type of fights. He rises to the occasion, if you will, because it allows him to kind of put the chip on his shoulder, be like, hey, I'm not old, I'm not washed. Like a lot of people, have said about him over his last couple of performances, but like he generally tends to do very well in these type of fights. But man, when I did a lot of tape study on Vitor Petrino because he fought Tyson Pedro, and obviously being Australian, we covered him on our ESPN show. And Vitor is a very, very tough athlete to figure out. He's strong. He is massive for the weight class. He's athletic. He is explosive. He has the cardio. He doesn't tend to slow down. Like his pace doesn't slow as the fight goes on. He's got good striking. I would say like his striking is probably, it's good and it's still developing. I don't think we've seen his ceiling there at all. But then he also has the ability to wrestle and grapple, and he's so well-rounded that there is a pathway to beat him, but knowing the pathway and executing when you get in there, very different.
Yeah, his fight with Tyson Pedro was the complete opposite of what I thought that fight was going to be on paper, right? Because when we saw it, it was like these two are just going to crash and somebody's going to fall in the first 2 minutes, and that's not what we saw at all in that fight.
No, and I don't know if a part of that was due to Tyson's like heart not being in it anymore, because he retired after that fight and a lot of people didn't see that coming, and he has now switched to boxing. But I feel like, how much of that was Tyson just not loving MMA anymore? You know what I mean? How much of that was like, man, I'm just gonna, whatever happens, happens. But like his desire or will to win wasn't as strong as, like, say, when he first started in the UFC, because he'd already made up his mind before going into that fight that this was going to be his last fight in the UFC. So I don't know, that could have played a factor, but I also don't want to downplay Petrino's performance because he shut down. He shut down Tyson's striking, which the one is one of his best assets. He was able to execute a game plan that had a lot of success. And so I don't want to take that away from him either.
Yeah, it was just a very smart, calculated performance. And that fight was not even all that competitive based on the game plan that Petrino brought to the Apex that day. But you mentioned things that we didn't see coming, and you mentioned Steve Erceg, and you asked the question, is he the right guy? And I've been saying that, at least with the UFC, meritocracy is there every so often. There's obviously the star power conversation, but the next best thing in terms of getting big fights, your best friend is availability. And Steve Erceg, right place at the right time. Pantoja needed a guy to fight on this card. He 100%. Was available. He's coming off of a knockout win. And what's crazy about all of this is you have fighters like Bilal Muhammad and Merab Dvalishvili on these long winning streaks. They've been screaming for their chance to fight for a belt for years. Some of the fans are like, come on, what else do they need to do? And Steve Erceg wins 3 fights and could be a UFC champion before either is even announced to fight for a respective belt in their weight classes. It is wild. It's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
But on top of that, everyone, when this is announced, is like, oh, come on. Pantoja is going to run this dude over. This is not going to be competitive. Look how good Pantoja has looked. What do you say to somebody who says, you know what? Pantoja is going to run this dude over. Erceg's only the number 10 guy. What are we doing here?
Well, I think the reason why that narrative is the way that it is because we haven't seen much of Erceg. You know, he's got 3 fights in the UFC, and I actually went back, and of recent, the 2 people that have had similar instances, it was Prochaska had 2 fights in the UFC before fighting for a title, and Alex Pereira had 3 before fighting for a title. And look what happened with both those guys. You know, I think obviously different circumstances, but the narrative is like, we just haven't seen Steve tested, right? And I think a lot of the reason why he was given this opportunity, big part was recency bias. He fought on the same card as Muhammad Mokaev. I know he's been campaigning, he's undefeated, he wants a title shot. However, if you are a matchmaker and you look at what's Steve Erceg's fight against Matt Schnell, and you look at Muhammad Mokaev's fight, you're going to go with Steve Erceg because he got the finish. He looked great. It was exciting. That's what the fans want to see. And whilst Muhammad Mokaev is a phenomenal fighter, and he does deserve a title shot, with that performance, for me, there was more questions than, you know, because he slowed, he gassed. He wasn't as invincible as we'd seen him to date. And that's a guy like Alex Perez, that's what he does. He's a veteran. He's hard to put away. He's hard to fight. And I think it just showed that Mokaev needs more time developing before getting a title shot. I think he'll get there. He just needed more time. And so that is the kind of the reason why Erceg, I feel, got this over somebody like Muhammad Mokaev. And man, Pantoja has looked phenomenal. Like his relentlessness to win, his mindset, once he, you know, kind of went away, started working on his conditioning, working on his cardio and finessing his game to work for him. He has looked exceptional over his last couple fights. And is it a tough fight for Steve? 100%. But I think people are discounting Steve a lot. And I think the only reason is because he hasn't been tested in the eyes of the UFC fans. Like, he is very well-rounded. He has the striking advantage. He is a national gold medal wrestler. So he has the ability to scramble. He's not going to settle. He's not going to accept being put on his back. He's going to scramble. He's going to be comfortable in those positions. And he's got good, you know, he's got a good get back up game if it does hit the mat, because he understands that his best asset is his striking. And we interviewed him I would say like about a month ago, and he said, look, a lot of fighters, they either try to strike with him and they avoid the grappling. He's like, I'm not scared to grapple with him. He's like, everyone thought I was a grappler before the Matt Schnell fight. So that I think that could play key. It could be very much he's going to fuck around and find out that he's not, you know, on the level of Pantoja, but he could find out like, oh wait, like I can hang here. This is going to be able to open up a lot of my striking more because I don't have to fear him taking me down and me not being able to get back up.
How much of a factor do you think him being so unknown, not just to like the mass, like Pantoja's not going to sit there and be like, oh, who is this guy? I'm not even going to prepare for. I'm not going to watch any of his film. I'm not going to even listen to my coaches. Like, you know, that's not going to happen. But Pantoja, the guys he's fighting, Moreno and Royval and all these other guys, you know, Alex Perez in the past, just tons of footage and sample sizes left and right. He could jump on UFC Fight Pass and watch 35 fights combined of those fighters. But, you know, Steve Erceg, I was going to call him Vinny Siggs because that's what we've been calling him on the site. Because he's become this, because it's like Steve Erceg. And then we found out his middle name was Vincenzo. And now we've transformed him into like this completely different character. But that's the point. But
I love that.
How much does the unknown sort of factor into this fight? I
mean, it definitely plays into Steve's favor, that's for sure, because I mean, not a lot of footage to watch, particularly at the high level. But you can't think too much into that, because at the end of the day, like, watching footage, while it can help you prepare for certain tendencies, that type of stuff, at the end of the day, you shouldn't be solely focused on what they're doing. You need to execute your own game plan. Like, the opportunities are going to present themselves. You just need to execute in the moment. And that's a fighter by fighter, base thing. Like, everybody reacts differently. Some people don't pull the trigger. Like, Brandon Royval, I feel like he didn't pull the trigger until the 4th round against Pantoja. Like, he wasn't able to figure it out. And once he did, it was a little bit too late. I think that's the beauty for Steve, is he does have a lot of that footage of, like, oh, when you do put the pressure on him, you do put the pace, you do put the volume on Pantoja, you're able to have success. Just these guys weren't able to do it from the get-go. So that's great for Steve, obviously. Now for Pantoja, it's going to be about closing the mid-range. Like, he knows where he does his best work. The mid-range, the power overhands, closing the distance, grappling, scrambling. And one thing that I think that a lot of people might not notice about Pantoja is, like, his ability, whether he's fresh or whether he's tired, to complete a takedown is exceptional. Like, he's noticeably exhausted. Look at the Brandon Moreno fight, the one where he won the bout. He was exhausted. He got him down almost every single time. He finds ways to win. His grappling and his wrestling for MMA for his game is one of the best, in my opinion, and particularly in that division. So he just needs to go out there and be like, I know what I'm good at. I know where I'm good at. I'm going to take it there. And no matter what, I'll adjust.
Like, the closer we get to this fight, the more intriguing it gets for me. Like, and I've been intrigued from Jump Street, just because it's almost like Steve has, and I'm not going to say that because I know he feels like his dream is to be a UFC champion. So he's obviously putting that pressure on himself. Like, if I don't get it, like, how much longer will it take me to get back here? So I have to take advantage of this opportunity. But most people feel like he's playing with house money here, that if he loses, it's not the end of the world, and that all the pressure is on Pantoja. I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't know. I don't feel like the pressure is really on either of them. Because, like, look, if Steve goes out there and he comes up short, listen, this is your fourth fight in the UFC. You go back, you fight the guys that you skipped in the top 10. Like, there's a lot of fights there for you. Another couple fights and you'll be right back there. I would say, like, and then even for Pantoja, I don't even feel like if he wants to put pressure on himself, he can do that if that helps him with rising to the occasion. Yeah, I'm all for that. But I don't feel like there should be any pressure on him anyway, because Steve is a legitimate threat. Like, he should be taking him seriously. And I mean, as every champion does defending their belts, there is some element of pressure to perform and continue to win, to continue being the champion. So there's going to be an element there, but I don't think it's overly, like, exaggerated, if you will.
If Erceg wins the belt, is this the most unlikely run to a title in UFC history? I'm not saying it's like the biggest upset, because you mentioned Yuri Prochazka did in short order, but when he came over, everybody knew who he was already, because he just gotten so many chaotic battles in Ryzen. And Alex Pereira, like, we knew what they were trying to do, setting him up for the Izzy fight. Like, even Anderson Silva got a title shot after one UFC fight, but everybody knew who Anderson Silva was. Steve Erceg coming out of nowhere to fight for a belt in less than a year. If he goes out there and wins in Rio, of all places, on enemy territory, is this the most unlikely run to a title that you can remember in the UFC?
Oh, 100%. And like, and that's the beauty of this game, right? Is you have the ability to, like, change your life like that. Like, one opportunity, backing yourself. And, like, what I really love about Steve is, like, he's so unassuming. Like, he's such an unassuming guy. He's such an unassuming, like, when you look at him, you don't expect him to be this savage in the cage. Like, he's just such a great person, great human being behind the scenes. And then he gets in there and like he has pieced it all together. Like, he has such a complete game. Like, obviously everyone's not perfect. Like, you can't, like, it's very rarely do we ever see a completely perfect fighter. But I mean, he strives to be the best. He's continually improving. And I mean, I would say it would be like like one of the craziest, like, I wouldn't say upset, but definitely path to winning a title, considering nobody really knew who he was until he knocked out Matt Chanel. And his first fight in the UFC, he took on short notice. So it's like, crazy. I know.
Well, I mean, I think he's got a chance. So it's going to be a really good fight. I'm looking forward to it. And then before that happens, we will see the return to the octagon of the King of Rio, Jose Aldo, competing in Rio once again. He's going to face Jonathan Martinez, the silence behind the violence, as I refer to him as. This booking was a bit out of left field, but Aldo certainly gives a boost to things when it comes to UFC 301. Two incredible leg kickers getting after it for potentially 15 minutes, Megan.
That's what I'm most excited about. Like, I mean, Jose Aldo is like the king of leg kicks. Like, he changed the sport of MMA when it comes to leg kicks. Like, I mean, I remember, what he did to Uriah Faber back in WEC. Like, his leg was absolutely like purple, like black and blue. And I am sure that Martinez has adopted a lot of what Jose Aldo did during, his tenure to his leg kicking game. And that's what makes this fight so intriguing, because they both are very similar type of fighters, that they like to fight on the outside, pick their opponent apart. They like to make it look pretty at their range, at their pace. They're calling the shots. So I think it's really going to come down to who is going to pressure first and make adjustments.
This is probably the last time we're going to see Jose Aldo fighting in the UFC. I mean, we thought that after the Merab fight because he retired, but it's pretty much out there now. It's his last fight on his deal. He wants to go do other things, and able to do all those other things that he would want to do. He's got to be free and clear from the UFC. But I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll say, hey, go fight Sean O'Malley and we'll pay you a floppity jillion dollars. You can go ahead and do that. Maybe he'll stick around. But do you feel like this is the last time you'll watch Jose Aldo compete in the UFC?
Probably, yeah. And I think a big part of the reason why he is coming back is because it's Rio. Him wanting to have one more fight in Rio, one more fight in front of, home crowd, in front of the Brazilian fans, I think plays a big factor into this. And I mean, look, he is not that old. He's only a couple of years older than I am. He's not that old, okay? But he's old in fight years. And how much more does he want to keep putting his, like, him spending most of his career at 145 and now in his 30s dropping to 135? Oh my God. That hurts me, because like, I know how hard it was for me to cut to 145. Like, I can't even imagine, like, as you start getting older, the miles start wearing on you, dropping another extra 10 pounds. Like, it just shows you how much of a competitor Jose Aldo is. Would I love to see him continue fighting past this? Sure, but I would not be surprised if this is his last one, particularly in the UFC.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting to see where he could go next, especially with the kind of money like the BKFCs of the world are throwing around right now. Like, could we see him fight there? Like, it's just crazy to think about. And on the other end, obviously Aldo is a longtime champ. He's one of the greatest of all time, in my opinion. And it's always nice to have a name like that on your resume, but he hasn't fought in a while. So I think one of the intriguing factors about this fight, Megan, what does a win do for Jonathan Martinez, especially in this division that is just stacked and loaded with talents at 135 pounds?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, it's kind of like, I kind of feel bad in a way for Jonathan, particularly because, like, you put him in this position that Aldo's coming out of retirement. You now have to fight probably somebody that you've looked up to most of your fighting career. And while a win is great, doesn't really do much for him in terms of the rankings because Aldo has been out for so long. However, I think the resume of Aldo helps in some regard because former featherweight champion, he fought for the Bantamweight championship as well. Like he has been a title contender, been at the top, in both divisions. So he was competitive. I mean, shit, I seen a stat today that he stopped all 14 of Merab Dvalishvili's takedown attempts, which nobody has been able to do that. So Aldo can still hang. He can still compete. Sometimes he gets the nod, sometimes he doesn't. But I think for Martinez, it's like, it reminds me of his teammate, Chris Gutierrez, fighting Frankie Edgar.
Great point.
It's like, fuck, you're my idol. I've been watching you my whole life. I don't want to fight you. Now I have to fight you. And look, in Chris's instance, he knocked him out. Like, and it's just like that weighs on you so much. And I feel like maybe it's very similar for Jonathan. And, he's on a 6-fight win streak. Add another name, add a legend, a Hall of Famer to that list. I mean, it's got to shoot him up the rankings for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you flying knees Jose Aldo unconscious like Chris Gutierrez did, I mean, golly, the buzz he will gain from that will be incredible.
Imagine if he leg kick stoppages him. Because he already has 2. He leg kick stoppages the leg kicker. I don't see that happening because, I mean, even though Jose doesn't leg kick as much as he did, back in the day, because he's been working more of his boxing, I don't see that happening, partly because like Aldo understands the kicking game. Like he understands, the weight distribution for him and what he needs to do to be able to counter the kicking game. Because I mean, you've seen his fight with Pedro Munoz. Munoz tried to kick him a lot. He just wasn't able to have a lot of success because he has that straight up and down Muay Thai style of stance that is a really great counter for the leg kick because he's able to pick up that leg pretty easily as opposed to say like a boxer who's very heavy on that lead leg.
Yeah. King of leg kicks, king of checking leg kicks as well.
I know.
It's just super underrated. And you mentioned the Merab thing, that the takedown defense, incredibly underrated. He might be the best ever at defending takedowns. It's absolutely incredible pound for pound. He's
so
something
hard
else.
to take down. No, like, and that's what's like crazy is he's just so good. And like I said, like his run between, was it 2007 when he got into WEC to when he lost to Conor McGregor in 2015, I feel like is probably one of the best stretches of combat sports dominance that we'll ever see. Barring your like Anderson Silvas, your John Jones, your GSP type names, because I feel like they're kind of up there, like comparable. But his run was, I don't think we'll ever see anything like that ever again. Like it was phenomenal to watch, phenomenal to look back and watch, and it's what makes him one of the best and most respected, guys in the organization.
100%. Last thing, we mentioned the rest of the main card: Anthony Smith, Vitor Petrino. You get your eye on that. We got Michel Pereira, Ihor Potieria, Paul Craig, Caio Barriault. All those fights are good. All of them have stakes, ranked fighters, etc. Yeah. What's the low key banger for you? What's the fight that no one is talking about that deserves more shine? I'll let you in on mine. Miktabek Oralbai versus Elvis Brenner. Absolutely rules. Incredible matchmaking. Those two guys this is the fight of like, who's that dude at 155? Right. Like who's the next guy? It's so good. Two terrifying individuals, two 26-year-old up and comers in the best division in the sport. Love that fight. What's the other fight that you have your eye on?
I mean, I'm actually I'm really looking at Barriault Craig. I mean, obviously people know who they are, but for me, it's like, okay, Paul Craig's transitioned down to 185. He's 1-1 now. And it's like, can he put it together? that's the big question, because, he's not the most polished striker. He is a BJJ guy, struggles to close the range, and he struggles to get a hold of those guys and take those lengthy strikers down. Can he figure it out? Like, is this move to 185? Was it the right decision? Yes, he won one, but then he lost to Brendan Allen, and it was very, he didn't really do anything. Like, Brendan Allen was able to, took him down, was comfortable being on the ground with him. Like, the jiu-jitsu wasn't really a big threat. And then, like, he doesn't really pose anything else as a threat. Like, I want to see an evolution. I want to see that change. I want to see that moving to 185 was the right decision. And I mean, Barriault, he's on a 14-fight win streak. And name over somebody like Paul Craig is huge for somebody like him. And he's looked great against, Abus, Magomedov, Olashashek. He's got that karate style, which is exciting. I just hope that he's able to pull the trigger, because he's another guy who, sometimes doesn't pull the trigger because he's waiting. He hesitates a little bit too much. So I think that one for me is the one that I'm really intrigued about, just for the fact that, like, okay, can Barriault pull the trigger? Is he going to be able to dominate? Because, like, when you're in a position like Barriault, it's not about just winning anymore. It's about what you did in the win. Like, was it impressive? Were you making improvements? Were you looking better than the last fight? Were you able to, assert your will onto your opponent? And I think for Craig, it's like, is it the move? Like, was this the right move? Like, have you made the adjustments? Are you going to be able to make the adjustments? And if you haven't, where does he go from there?
I mean, if the skill set of Paul Craig matches the physical, I mean, have you seen Paul Craig? Blonde hair, tapping into his inner Charles Oliveira, and
I love it.
Needed a change, and I respect that about him, and I respect all the fighters competing on this card. It's gonna be a good one, and I really appreciate you jumping on to help us preview this event, Megan. Where can everybody find you? Where can everybody find the shows for other previews of this event?
Yeah, Megan Anderson on all my socials, the Megan Anderson Show on YouTube, and that's it. I thankfully got all of, like, the same handles, so I don't have to name off all these different iterations of my handle. So it's all just Megan Anderson, one word, and then the Megan Anderson Show on YouTube.
Awesome. Megan, thank you so much. I appreciate the time. Enjoy the fights on Saturday.
No, thanks for having me, and you too.